Chapter 8. A New Era. Woo! The fierce wind howled, and torrential rain poured down as the three-masted sailing ship heaved up and down among wave mountains, like a toy being tossed and caught by a giant. Alger Wilson's eyes, once deep red, cleared, and he found himself still standing on the deck, no different from before. Then, he watched as the bizarrely shaped glass bottle in his hand shattered with a crack, its frost turning to water and mingling with the raindrops. In just 2 or 3 seconds, this ancient artifact had completely lost any trace of its former existence. A hexagonal crystal snowflake appeared in Alger's palm, then quickly faded until it seemed to retract into his flesh. Alger, as if pondering something, imperceptibly nodded and was silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned and walked towards the entrance to the cabin. Just as he was about to enter, he encountered a man dressed in a robe embroidered with lightning patterns coming out. The man with soft yellow hair stopped, looked at Alger, and extended his right hand, placing a clenched fist over his chest, saying, "The storm be with you." "The storm be with you," Alger replied, his rugged and deep face devoid of any extra emotion, likewise striking his left chest with his right fist. After exchanging greetings, Alger entered the cabin and walked down the corridor towards the distant captain's room. Along the way, he surprisingly didn't encounter any sailors or crew members. It was as quiet as the inside of a tomb. The door to the captain's room opened, revealing a soft, thick, dark brown carpet, with bookshelves on one side and a wine cabinet on the other. Book covers, slightly yellowed, and bottles of dark red wine sparkled under the candlelight with an unusual sheen. On the desk, where candles were placed, there was an ink bottle, a feather quill, a black metal telescope, and a brass sextant. Behind the desk, a middle-aged man with a pale face and wearing a captain's hat adorned with a skull looked at Alger, walking towards him, and said through gritted teeth in anger, "I won't surrender." Quote, "I believe you can do it," Alger responded calmly, as if commenting on the poor weather. "You?" The middle-aged man froze, seemingly not expecting such a response. At that moment, Alger slightly bowed his body and suddenly lunged forward, closing the distance between them to just the desk. Snap! He tensed his shoulder, and his right hand shot out, grabbing the middle-aged man by the throat. Without giving the man a chance to react, his hand back displayed illusory fish scales, and his fingers clenched fiercely. Crack! A crisp sound followed, and the middle-aged man's eyes widened in shock as he was lifted off his feet. His legs thrashed violently but quickly stilled. His gaze became vacant, pupils dilated, and a foul smell began to emanate as his trousers dampened. Alger lifted the middle-aged man, stooped his back, and started stepping towards the nearby wall. Bang! He used the man as a shield, slamming him hard against the front, his arms as robust as a monster's. The wooden wall broke on impact, and the violent storm with the briny scent of the sea surged in. Alger twisted his waist and threw the middle-aged man out of the cabin and into the wave-like mountains. The sky was dark, and the wind and rain roared as the forces of nature buried everything. Alger pulled out a white handkerchief, carefully wiped his right palm, and then threw it into the sea. He stepped back and patiently waited for his companion to enter. "What's wrong?" In less than 10 seconds, the man with soft yellow hair rushed in. "The captain has escaped," Alger gasped. Annoyed, he still retained some extraordinary powers. Quote, "Damn it!" The yellow-haired man cursed softly. He moved to the broken wall and stared into the distance. But apart from the wind, rain, and waves, he could see nothing. "Forget it. He was just incidental." The yellow-haired man waved his arm. "Finding this Tudor-era ghost ship will only be to our credit." Even as a devotee of the sea, He dared not dive into the waters in such weather. Besides, if the storm continues, the captain won't last much longer. Alger nodded, noticing the wooden wall's breach starting to visibly heal. He took a deep look, instinctively turned his head towards the position of the ship's helm and sails. Even through several layers of wood, he could clearly sense what was happening there. No first mate, no second mate, no crew, no sailors, not even a living soul. There was nothing there. The helm and sails eerily adjusted on their own. The image of the man shrouded in gray-white mist. The fool flashed in Alger's mind, and he suddenly sighed. He turned to look out at the raging winds and waves, and in a tone of both anticipation and fear, murmured, "A new era has begun." In the capital of the Kingdom of Rune, Beckland, in the Queen's District, Audrey Hall pinched her cheek, unable to believe what had just happened. On the dressing table in front of her, the ancient copper mirror was shattered into pieces. Her gaze moved down, and Audrey saw a deep red flowing across the back of her hand like a starry tattoo. The deep red gradually faded until it vanished into her skin. Only then did Audrey confirm that she was not dreaming. Her eyes shimmered, and her lips curled up slightly. She couldn't help but stand up and bend over to lift her skirt. Facing the air, she curtsied and began to dance the ancient elven dance, currently the most popular dance at court. Her figure was graceful, her face all smiles. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, someone knocked on the bedroom door. Who? Audrey stopped abruptly, assuming an elegant pose. "Miss, may I come in? You need to get ready," her personal maid asked from outside the door. Audrey turned her head towards the mirror on the dressing table, quickly subdued her smile to a faint trace. She looked left and right, ensuring her appearance was flawless before speaking softly. "Come in." The doorknob turned, and her personal maid Annie entered. "Oh, it's broken." Annie immediately noticed the fate of the ancient copper mirror. Audrey blinked slowly and said in a drawn-out tone, Yes. Well, Susie was in here earlier. You know, she always likes to wreak havoc." Quote, Susie was a not-so-purebred golden retriever, a gift received by her father, Count Hall, when purchasing foxhounds, but greatly adored by Audrey. "You need to discipline her properly." Annie expertly began cleaning up the pieces of the mirror, careful not to harm her mistress. Having finished this, she looked at Audrey and asked with a smile, "Which dress would you like to wear?" Quote, Audrey thought for a moment and said, "I like the one Mrs. Genia designed for my 17th birthday." "That won't do. People will say the Hall family is facing a financial crisis if you wear the same dress to a formal occasion again." Annie shook her head in disapproval. "But I really like it," Audrey emphasized gently. "You can wear it at home or at less formal occasions," Annie asserted, indicating there was no room for negotiation. "Then let's go with the one Mr. Seeds sent over the day before yesterday. The one with ruffled cuffs." Audrey took a discreet breath to maintain her graceful and sweet smile. "Your taste is always impeccable," Annie smiled, stepping back and called to someone outside the door. "Wardrobe 6. Never mind. I'll get it myself." The maids began to bustle about, one handling the long dress, one the jewelry, one the shoes, one the hat, one applying makeup to Miss Audrey, and one considering hairstyles. As preparations neared completion, Count Hall, dressed in a deep brown vest, appeared at the door. He wore a hat matching his outfit, sported a neat pair of mustaches, and his blue eyes were full of laughter. But the sagging muscles, bulging belly, and prominent laugh lines harshly spoiled the handsomeness of his youth. Beckland's brightest gem. "It's time for us to depart." Count Hall stood at the doorway, tapping on the open door. "Dad, please don't call me that." Audrey, with the help of a maid, stood up and feigned a bit of distress. Then, "My beautiful little princess, it's time to depart." Count Hall bent his left arm, gesturing for Audrey to take it. Audrey shook her head with a light smile. "That's Mrs. Hall's, the Countess, my dear mother's place." "This way then." Count Hall smiled and bent his right arm. "This is for a father's pride. Prills Port, Oak Island, Royal Navy Base." As Audrey stepped down from the carriage arm in arm with her father, she was startled by the colossal structure before her. In the nearby naval harbor lay a majestic giant ship gleaming with a metallic luster. It bore no sails, only a lookout tower, and had added 2 towering smokestacks and 2 exposed gun turrets fore and aft. It was so majestic and vast that the nearby sailing warships looked like newly born dwarves, clustering around a giant storm above. "Oh, my lord! Ironclad!" Quote. A chorus of astonishments softly intertwined. Audrey also felt the same shock. It was a man-made miracle, an unprecedented maritime wonder. After who knows how long, nobles, ministers, and House of Commons members finally recovered. At that moment, a black speck in the sky grew larger, eventually taking up a third of the sky and capturing everyone's gaze, making the atmosphere suddenly solemn. It was a colossal floating aircraft, with extremely smooth and graceful lines, painted in deep blue. Its sturdy yet lightweight alloy frame supporting a cotton fabric filled with hydrogen gas bags. Below it hung a cabin with machine gun ports, bomb bays, and flat trajectory gun ports, while the exaggerated buzzing of the high-octane steam engine and the frantic spinning of the rear propellers created a heart-stirring symphony. The royal family's airship had arrived, looking down upon everything with supreme dignity. A vertical downward emblem of the Sword of Judgment, with a ruby crown on the handle reflected sunlight on both sides of the cabin, a symbol of the Augustus family's heritage tracing back to the last era. Audrey, not yet 18 and not yet presented at the introduction ceremony under the Queen's guidance to formally enter Beckland's social scene and announce her adulthood, had to quietly stand by, unable to approach. However, she didn't mind much, even feeling relieved not to face the princes. The miracle that conquered the skies landed steadily, and the first to descend the escalator were the spirited young guards, dressed in red military uniforms, white trousers, adorned with medals, carrying rifles, forming 2 rows to wait for the appearance of King George III, the Queen, and the royal princes and princesses. Audrey was not unaccustomed to important figures and showed no interest. Instead, her gaze wandered towards the statue like black armored knights beside the king. In this era of steel, steam, and guns, there were still those who insisted on wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the deep black helmets exuded a sense of heaviness, authority, and the necessity of obedience. Could it be a higher sequence of punishment nights? Audrey's mind flashed with snippets of conversation from her elders at home, curious but daring not to approach. With the royal family's arrival, the ceremony finally began, and the current Prime Minister, Lord Archibald Nigel, stepped forward. A member of the Conservative Party, he was one of only 2 men to become Prime Minister as a commoner, knighted for his outstanding contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. Archibald's brother, a major Conservative supporter, was called Palace Nigel. The current Duke Nigel, Archibald, in his 50s, was tall and thin, with sparse hair and sharp eyes. After scanning the crowd, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, as you have seen, this is an ironclad, a ship that can overturn the era. 101 meters long, 21 meters wide, with a high freeboard design. The main armor belt is 457 millimeters thick, a displacement of 10,060 tons. with 4 305mm main guns at the front and back. Additionally equipped with 6 quick-firing guns, 12 6-pound guns, 18 6-barrel machine guns, and 4 torpedo tubes, capable of reaching a speed of 16 knots. Quote, "It will be the true dominator. It will conquer the seas." Quote, nobles, ministers, and members of parliament stirred at just the prime minister's description, let alone the actual ship before them. Archibald allowed a slight smile to show, gave a few more remarks, then turned to King George III and bowed. "Your Majesty, please name it. From Prills Port." "Let's call it the Prills," King George III said with considerable pleasure. Prills. Quote, Prills. Quote, starting from the Minister of the Navy, the Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy. The name spread in succession, finally reaching the ironclad where officers and soldiers cheered together. Prills. Quote, in a celebratory atmosphere, the saluting guns fired continuously, and King George III issued the command to set sail and test fire. Woo! The steam whistle sounded. Thick smoke billowed from the funnels, and the hum of machinery was faintly audible. The colossal vessel set sail, and when it fired its bow guns at an uninhabited island ahead, everyone was stunned. Boom! 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 The ground seemed to shake. Dust soared into the air. Hurricanes swept outwards, raising waves. Prime Minister Archibald turned with satisfaction and said to the nobles, ministers, and members of Parliament, "From now on, those 7 self-proclaimed pirate generals, those 4 who audaciously claim to be kings, can only tremble and wait for their doom." Quote, "Their era is over. Even if they have some extraordinary powers, possess ghost or cursed ships, the seas will only be dominated by ironclads." Quote, at that moment, Archibald's chief secretary deliberately asked, "So they can't build their own ironclads?" Quote, some nobles and members of parliament nodded secretly, considering the possibility. Archibald immediately smiled and slowly shook his head. "Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Building such an ironclad requires 3 large coal-steel conglomerates, 20 large-scale steel mills, 60 scientists from the Beckland Artillery Institute and the Prills Shipbuilding Institute, more senior engineers, 2 royal shipyards and their nearly 100 subsidiary parts factories, a Navy department, a shipbuilding commission, a cabinet, a king with extraordinary vision, and a great nation with an annual steel production of 12 million tons." Quote, "Pirates will never achieve this." Pausing, he then raised his arms and passionately shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of dreadnoughts and big guns has arrived." Quote,